and thanks everybody for coming out. We love the Mercury Cafe. We've been meeting here. We met here all through the pandemic, so they've been super helpful in having club events. So tip your servers well and have some good food. Okay, just let me know if you can't hear me. I'm going to try to get this mic as close as I can. But yeah, just let me know if you need me to speak louder, and feel free to ask any questions, because I'm going to be talking the whole time. So yeah, let me know if you need me to clarify anything. So anyways, the title of the talk, Dark Side of Psychedelia. How did it come about? It was like a conversation that I was having with Katie Etcheberry. She's one of the board members for Psychedelic Club of Denver. I would just be rambling on about like all the stuff that's happened, and that brings us to you know, I've always been interested in it, like spy movies and Cloak and Dagger and James Bond stuff and Jack Ryan. So what we're talking about tonight is a bird's eye view of what happened with drugs, with psychedelics, involving the intelligence community in the West, in the US, and the military-industrial complex during the Cold War. So, threw some memes in there for you guys. I've got some primary sources here that you can check out at a later date. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube about all these books. A Terrible Mistake. It's up here. It is like 900 pages long. So it is like one of the biggest documents out there about all the programs that went on during World War II and the Cold War. And the main crux of that is the assassination of an Army scientist named Frank Olson. We'll get into that. There you got Poisoner in Chief. That was a great biography of Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the MKUltra program for the CIA. That came out in 2019, 2020. And that is just an amazing book. If you are interested in the subject, I don't know that there's too many other biographies of Sidney Gottlieb. The Chaos book is amazing. There's all sorts of nuggets that you don't hear in everyday life. It comes up in podcasts once in a while, but the Charles Manson connection, we're not really going to go too deep into that, because you got, like on the right there, Chaos and Mary's Mosaic. That's Charles Manson, and that's the JFK assassination. So it's a little too deep of a rabbit hole to go down into tonight, but and then you've got these three on the bottom: Acid Dreams, a big bird's eye overview of, and then Storming Heaven, and The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. All really great titles. And so some of the fundamentals that we'll be talking about tonight. I love this. You've got this guy getting dosed with LSD, and in the 50s with like the crew cut haircut. And so this is like it looks like he's volunteering, so that's good. But we're going to talk about, like, a lot of this stuff is not voluntary. But anyways, Operation Paperclip, bringing the Nazi scientists over the U.S. Project Chatter, a Navy project testing drugs for interrogation. Artichoke and MKUltra, that's the main crux of the topic. The Edgewood Arsenal human experiments, that is a lesser known topic, and actually a topic of a 2022 documentary on the Discovery Channel, Discovery Plus. That's that little picture on the bottom. We'll talk about the Allen Memorial Institute and Operation Midnight Climax. I'll get to those definitions in a little bit. So yeah, this is me explaining MKUltra to my friends and family. It does make you seem kind of crazy, There's mind control. It actually did happen though. So that's like you got history on your side. And although Sidney Gottlieb, who was head of the Technical Services Division of the CIA and head of MKUltra, destroyed most of the documents after he left, or that was his last duty, was destroying all the documents. There were some that survived. Just pointing out some mind control elements in pop culture. The movie Gaslight, I don't know if y'all are familiar with that term gaslighting. It's from, I think it originates with this older movie where this man adjusts the gaslight to drive his spouse crazy. And then the scary one in the middle of Clockwork Orange, I don't really recommend that movie. It's kind of sketch. But yeah, they were doing a mind control thing there. And the Manchurian Candidate, that was really one of the big ones that came out during the Cold War about the fear of mind control. And so, yeah, that brings us to this Operation Paperclip, which was after the World War II, the United States really wanted to gain the advantage in the Cold War. They saw that coming, and so they would be capturing and sort of recruiting Nazi scientists. In this picture, you see Werner von Braun. He's the most famous one of them all. He was a rocket scientist. He developed the Saturn V rocket, which brought the astronauts to the moon. He also developed the V2 rocket for Hitler that was the Blitz of London. But yeah, he came to work for the United States developing our space program with the Saturn V rocket. He's probably the most prominent example of paperclip of the U.S. getting these guys from the Nazis instead of them going to the Soviet Union. Someone that is probably lesser known is Kurt Bloma, who was head of, I'm just going to use air quotes here, cancer research for the Nazi Party, for the Nazis. And basically he was the head of their biological warfare program. And so this cancer research center, he had, this is where it gets kind of, it starts getting sinister here because they gave prisoners cancer. They infected them with typhus, poisoned them with nerve gas, horrific medical experiments, including testing mescaline on concentration camp prisoners in Dachau. And so there was upwards of 30 prisoners who were experimented on with mescaline. And he was brought over on the Project Paperclip payroll and began to work with Sidney Gottlieb at the CIA at Camp Dietrich. Well, it became Fort Dietrich. We'll talk a little bit about that later, which is, Fort Dietrich is the head of the biological chemical warfare unit within the US. So definitely part of the biological program, but using drugs as well. That's why I put Kurt Bloma in here. And it's theorized that he escaped the gallows at Nuremberg by this Project Paperclip. It's called the Doctor's Trial in Nuremberg. You can look it up on YouTube. But yeah, he escaped the gallows. One that I didn't really know about, and I kind of learned about in the research here, was Project Chatter. right after the World War II, looking into drugs that would be good for interrogation techniques. And so they, the Navy, it was a Navy program, was looking into, they tested mescaline at Bethesda Research Institute in Maryland. Let's see. The Navy became interested in mescaline as an interrogation agent when American investigators learned of mind control experiments carried out by Nazi doctors at the Dachau concentration camp during World War II. After administering the hallucinogen to 30 prisoners, Nazis concluded that it was, quote, impossible to impose one's will on another person as in hypnosis, even with the strongest doses of mescaline had been given, but the drug afforded advantages to SS interrogators who were consistently able to draw even the most intimate secrets from the subject when questions were cleverly put. And that's from the book Acid Dreams, talks about that pre-MKUltra drug program with the Navy, but it was terminated in 1953. So yeah, it's starting to get yikes. We'll get to some interesting stuff here. This is a terrible mistake. This Frank Olson. He was a scientist for the Army, working at Camp Dietrich and the Edgewood Arsenal. He was one of the lead biological and chemical warfare scientists attached to the program for the Army. And there was an article here, it was really played up that he plunged out of a hotel window, and so it was suicide. And that's what the official government story was. And it got a little bit stranger even in the 70s when it was revealed that he was surreptitiously dosed with LSD before that supposed suicide. So yeah, I mean, he would come home and they would be doing experiments on laboratory animals. And his son has been in a lot of documentaries, Eric Olson, and he said that he could tell when his father was having a really bad day because he would come home very disturbed because some of the monkeys had died in their biological and chemical warfare programs. And you know, there were some things that led up to a serious moral doubts about his job. A couple of incidences of traveling to Germany, witnessing interrogations at black sites where prisoners of the Allies would die in these interrogations because of too much drugs or just abuse, heart attack, just died of the torture or whatever. And he witnessed that. He also was in the UK in Portion Down, which is their chemical warfare headquarters, and witnessed UK soldiers who they were testing sarin gas on. And so he witnessed that, and they died. And so he comes home one day and he says to his wife that he's made a terrible mistake. And that's the crisis of like his morality, like what have I done? That he's leading this program. And so how does this relate to psychedelics? Well, because there was a lot of crossover between the chemical and biological warfare program and the CIA, and him making a terrible mistake is that he wants to get out of this, and there's no way out. The allegation in a terrible mistake is that he was assassinated, pushed out of the window, blamed on the LSD that they they gave him. He went insane, he jumped out the window. And that was like the perfect way to get rid of somebody, make it look like an accident. So yeah, actually, the really well-researched book eventually turned into a Netflix show. You guys are probably familiar with Hamilton Morris. Come on, you guys know who that is, right? We love Hamilton, and his father is Errol Morris, and who's the famous documentary filmmaker. And so Hamilton got Errol Morris interested in the Frank Olson story, and a couple years ago they came out with Wormwood. It's just a 2-minute video. It's the trailer to it, and we'll show it here.
What were you told at the time of your father's death?
I was told that your father has had an accident. But that was the cover story told by the CIA. My father, Frank Olson, was an Army scientist. His research group had a relationship with the CIA. They take him to New York Tuesday morning, early Saturday morning, he's dead. What was my father doing? What was the CIA doing?
Sorry guys, this thing.
What happened there?
The released CIA documents deal with a project codenamed MKUltra.
There was in it a story of a CIA experiment on an unwitting civilian who was given LSD.
You're the one on stage tonight, Dr. Olson. You're all a bunch of jokers.
This has been the shift from thinking that my father's death was a mysterious suicide to knowing that it was a CIA atrocity.
This is 1975. There were a lot of questions about the integrity of the U.S. government.
The government was so eager to shut this down.
The tragedy that happened to the family was very deep and very real.
Eric's whole life has been sucked into this terrible hole.
The CIA was using LSD on people, but I think the real bad was something worse. He was a man that was profoundly distressed about what he was learning.
Filing new information.
Frank Olson, a former CIA scientist, may have been murdered.
If you thought somebody was detrimental, you would have no problem dealing with it.
But then the question is, who ordered that?
The United States began to do things which put its own democratic institutions in great jeopardy. And my father was in the center of that.
Frank was somebody who has secrets, and he was dangerous. I can't tell you more.
Yeah, so check that out if you get some time. Wormwood on Netflix. Hamilton's dad.
Jacob, is that currently out on Netflix?
Oh yeah, it came out a couple years ago, and it wasn't really super successful, so that kind of makes me sad. But anyways, it's pretty good. And then that brings us to the next character in the story, Sidney Gottlieb. Stephen Kinzer wrote this amazing biography in 2019, Poisoner in Chief. It did get some media play when it came out because it did have some revelations, which I'll go into a little later, about some of the particularities of the MKUltra program under Sidney Gottlieb. One of them is Whitey Bulger, who just died in federal prison the other week. He was given LSD at a penitentiary in Atlanta. And so that came out in that book. I don't know that we knew that beforehand. And another one that it's too secret. I'll have to share it with you when we get to the slide, but it involves Denver. Woo. Yeah. So I mean, just a little bit about Gottlieb. He was raised in the Bronx, son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants. He was born with a clubfoot, and so he couldn't serve in the military during World War II. So he did his best to excel in other ways to help out the country during the wartime period. Went to City College in New York, got transferred to the University of Wisconsin and earned a PhD in biochemistry. And that really launched his career into working for the FDA and then working for the National Research Council, which in turn brought him over. So he's studying agriculture, he's studying chemicals, and working in these government positions, and is brought over to the CIA, and then really takes over this MKUltra program. And let me just take a look at the slide. It's a little hard to see from here. I mean, there's not very many pictures of him. This is the two pictures that I've shown are from his appearance in front of the church committee in the 1970s, and we don't really have any other pictures. Stephen Kinzer's book is just amazing. He really talks about how he was like one of the most powerful men in America. I mean, the MKUltra program, it infiltrated universities, it infiltrated hospitals, and you know, the main goal was to look for techniques that would shield American agents, and then also the techniques that they could use to weaponize against other agents. And so widespread use of LSD. I mean, some of the stories that you're probably familiar with. Ken Kesey was working at the hospital in Menlo Park in California and got his hands on mescaline and LSD, and wrote one Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then did the Merry Pranksters thing. So like, there's a big connection between the counterculture and the CIA. I don't really go into that too much, but you guys probably know that. I wanted to humanize it a little bit by talking about one of the people who was affected by this program, Stanley Glickman. He's mentioned in Poisoner in Chief. He's an artist in New York City in the 50s, and moves to Paris in the 50s to become an artist. And he was hanging out at this cafe and is approached by some Americans that convince him to have a drink with them. And he had a drink with them, and that drink was spiked with LSD. And after that, he never was the same, became a recluse, and just was very aloof for the rest of his life. And here's a short 2-minute clip on Stephen Kinzer talking about the Stanley Glickman case and why he was actually targeted.
After the first MKUltra revelations came out as a result of the Church Committee investigation, a small number of people who had been victimized in Gottlieb's experiments slowly began to put it together and began to think, that's what happened to me. And a few of these actually launched lawsuits. So one of these guys was a fellow named Stanley Glickman, who Gottlieb had poisoned with LSD in a bar back in the 1950s. I learned in my research that people who have hepatitis sometimes have very extreme reaction to LSD, and apparently Gottlieb was interested in experimenting on this. So this guy did have hepatitis. He was lured into a bar, he was given this drug by a man with a club foot, and then his life completely fell apart. He never painted again, he was an art student, he never had a romantic relationship, and he became a street person in Greenwich Village for the rest of his life. More than 20 years after this happened, his sister was watching TV on the church when the church committee reports came on, and she called her brother and said, "This was you, remember? The drink, the guy with the club foot, everything, that was it." So they started a lawsuit, and they actually named Gottlieb as a defendant. Needless to say, the CIA intervened, and the court case dragged on and on and on. The guy finally died in the 1980s, but the sister would not give up the lawsuit. And finally, in 1999, after almost 20 years of pursuing that case, it was just about to come to trial. Gottlieb was a named defendant, would have had to get on the stand, testify under oath, not just about this program, but about the whole MKUltra project. And just as the court case was about to open, Gottlieb died. I later went to visit the lawyer, now well into his 90s, living on Long Island, who followed this case for 20 years and shared his entire garage full of papers with me. And he told me Eric Olson, the son of the guy that went out the window, came to visit me right after Gottlieb died. And we toasted to Gottlieb's death. And we found out that we had both reached the same conclusion. He killed himself. He didn't want to be the vehicle by which all of this came out and by which great damage might be caused to the institution that he'd spent his whole career serving. Nobody knows if this is true. He was immediately cremated. And besides, he was renowned as an expert who not only could create poisons, but poisons that could never be detected in any autopsy.
Yeah, so that's one of the conclusions that comes out in Poisoner in Chief. It's never really confirmed, but it's suspected that Sidney Gottlieb took his own life with some kind of poison to just whatever, hide the secrets, or just part of the guilt trip that he was on for all the suffering that he caused. But yeah, so it's just one example of one of the people that were directly affected by an unwitting American citizen being drugged by their government. And if you, it's like, I grew up in the 80s, so I was like watching Star Wars a lot, so if you thought Sidney Gottlieb was like Darth Vader, Dr. Ewan Cameron is like the Emperor. Like, this is some fucked up stuff. What we've got here, he's a Scottish American. What was interesting that I saw in his biography was he was president of the American Psychiatric Association from 52 to 53. And basically you can see to the right of his photo is Ravenscroft, which is part of the Allen Memorial Institute. It's in Montreal, Canada, and that's where he was a doctor who was experimenting on his patients. Some of the main things that he was doing, and of course I have to say that his program at the hospital in Canada was part of the CIA's MKUltra program. So they were gathering their research, part of their research from him and what he was doing there. So they're connected, even though it's in Canada. And so Cameron came up with some interesting ideas. One of them is he was really interested in something called de-patterning. and that's brainwashing, if you will, or just cleaning it out, cleaning the slate. And so they had something called psychic driving, which was an audio tape that was played on a loop with the headphones on, and the person was drugged. And they would play a message like 500,000 times. And so psychic driving, it's, you know, he was, the line between therapy and like torture is really, I don't know if he thought he was doing like the right thing or if he was just sadistic. But yeah, anyways, and then sleep. He had this thing called the sleep room, and in the previous slide you saw that book on the top, in the sleep room, and then Canadian TV made it into a 3-hour TV movie called The Sleep Room, and he would be putting people to sleep for like days, weeks, and weeks on end, like a month, combined with electric shock and extensive use of psychedelics. Not in the sleep room necessarily, but in the psychic driving for sure. Yeah, so it's part of this behavior modification. And some of these techniques have been used by governments on prisoners as a form of psychological torture. Certainly the psychic driving, we saw that. And then sensory deprivation, we've seen that. I wanted to give you, these are shorter clips, they're 2 and 3 minutes. But in the 1970s, what happened is you had Seymour Hersh did an article, and it came out that the CIA was engaged in all these operations with drugs. I mean, the 70s were a crazy time because you had, you had Watergate on top of that, and then you had the FBI with COINTELPRO. But anyways, this 1975 is the Church Committee, and that's it was in the Congress and the Senate where they were investigating these crimes. And so some of the things that came out, and this is an ABC News from like 1979. I clipped it down, but I wanted to clip it down to the part where where one of the victims of the program is talking. So we're not just hearing from officials. So this is a couple minutes.
But Cameron would plunge on. The next step was what he called psychic driving. This involved almost endless tape-recorded messages and more drugs for the patient. Cameron wrote that this was the way to make direct control changes in personality.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world. And I became more and more despondent and more angry. I just became so despondent that I thought I can't live like this any longer. And I thought I would just go out and throw myself underneath the cars on McGregor. I stood on the curb of that street and I stood there and I thought, okay, go. And then I thought, what if you're not killed? What if you're just maimed? What if you don't die and you live and you can't even talk anymore? And I couldn't do it.
The most severe technique Cameron used was de-patterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms.
People in there were like babies. They cried and they were very disoriented. And we were very afraid of the sleep room. We used to walk very carefully against the side of the corridor that was opposite the sleep room with our backs to the wall when we go by.
Cameron used this combined sleep electroshock treatment on patients as long as 30 days. One patient he kept asleep for 65 days.
But damn it all, I wouldn't. I could have maybe had a different kind of life. And that makes me angry and sad, and I don't know how to explain how I feel, really. I just
How did you feel when you learned that Dr. Cameron's experimentation was financed by the CIA?
Well, I thought, I can't even use the word that I thought, because I thought, that bastard, and he was too smart. He knew who he was working for, and, excuse me, but, I just can't, sometimes I can't believe it, and yet I know it's true.
If you had the opportunity to say something to the people at the Central Intelligence Agency who financed this study, what would you say?
I realize the CIA is a very important organization and they have a very important job to do, but God, it surely doesn't have to be done on people who are totally incapable of knowing what's happening or having any defense against it. And I can't imagine the mentality of people who would do this. I just can't.
And you can check out some more of her interview on, there's lots of clips on YouTube. She's spoken several times to news organizations, and it describes being dosed intravenously with LSD. I have a clip from the Sleep Room movie, but I think I'm going to skip that just for interest of time. It's kind of, if you're interested, check it out. It is on YouTube, the 3-hour movie. And the Canadian government has really done more with this than the US government in a lot of ways. Canadians who are subject to these experiments were paid out in a lawsuit. From what I can tell, that is not true of the American side.
But Cameron, silly, you don't even know.
Okay, y'all, we're just kind of scratching the surface here. I mean, there's a lot of tentacles. This program goes in a lot of different directions. There is more. And one of the things that came out at in Stephen Kinzer's book, Poisoner in Chief, was that there was an MKUltra program at the University of Denver at DU. And I really don't think that there's been any real reporting on this. It didn't involve drugs, so that makes it less sensational, but it involved hypnosis. And what I was able to discover online, this is the Vidette, it's a student newspaper out of Louisiana, and it talks about how they use these hypnosis experiments at DU. And so there's not much written about it. This is actually an article from the Chicago Sun-Times. He said it was a flop, but obviously, that was part of their hypnosis was definitely part of their program to make their agents immune to pain in the field through hypnosis, those sort of things. So anyways, it's something I want to look into a lot more and see what we can find about the DU program. But that was briefly mentioned, like one sentence in poisoner in chief, and I was like, oh my God, I gotta find out more about that. And that will bring us to the other portion of, we'll talk about the, and I think I can play this in the background while I'm talking. It's a US government film of Army soldiers being dosed with LSD and then marching in formation. They like crack up a lot during, you'll see that. But basically it's a kind of a quasi-legal situation because the Army was looking for volunteers during the 60s to go to Edgewood Arsenal. It's the same place, you can, let me fast forward a little bit. Okay, they get dosed here in a second, they're straight right now. But the Edgewood Arsenal is at Fort Detrick, and it's where, if you look at that top picture, that's called USAMRIID. That's the Army Infectious Disease Research Center. So that's like, it's still the hub of where we have done all of our stuff. But this is, the Edgewood Arsenal was the headquarters of the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps. Yeah, this is like they're cracking up. They can't really hold, like you'll see in a second, they can't hold composure. But yeah, so that's in the National Archives. You can find out about that. But they were exposed to some not so fun things, as we'll see here. So it's development of chemical weapons. And part of the development of those weapons involved incapacitating drugs. And one of those is BZ, which is actually the next slide, but this is a drug that they came up with which is very closely related to BZ. Like, what is BZ? How many folks have seen that movie, Jacob's Ladder? It's crazy. It's about, they go to Vietnam and they're dosed, and it's this whole mystery, and it's kind of supernatural. But BZ is a legit chemical weapon, and it is I believe it's a belladonna alkaloid. So it comes from that side of, it's beyond a psychedelic, it's a deliriant, and so I like the symptoms. They made into a little rhyme. Mad as a hatter, red as a beet, dry as a bone, and blind as a bat. But so anyways, when these people signed up, they were active duty in the Army, they signed up to, you're going to go test, like, equipment. And they were told that they were going to test equipment like gas masks, rubber boots, things related to chemical warfare. But really, in actuality, they were drugged with, these drugs were, like BZ, much more intense than your classical LSD. We're talking days, and people don't know the fact that it's a deliriant, which is a higher classification than a psychedelic, is that there's really no way to tell the difference between you can't tell what's real and what's not. So it's a higher level, and you know, you can go really deep into the rabbit hole with those belladonna alkaloids and that whole family, like scopolamine, for instance. That's a really that was used by the Nazis and the Soviet Union, the U.S. As a interrogation drug, a truth serum. I mean, that's the CIA and the MKUltra was truth serum, and these guys were just, the army was just testing out chemicals on soldiers. And so I do have a video. It's a little bit longer. It's 10 minutes, and then I have a few more slides after that. But it's a really good 10 minutes. Tara Palmieri, who was a White House correspondent for ABC News, put together a program for Discovery Plus that came out earlier this summer called Dr. Delirium and the Edgewater experiments. And it's something that's really, the reason I wanted to show the clip is because it's not talked about. MKUltra is very much in the public imagination. Netflix did a show, but these army experiments have a lower profile. And so what you'll see is just, it's not really talked about as much. And here, I'll play the clip.
Feel the effects of the agent?
Everyone's moving. They had no idea what the drug was going to do to us. They just moved the monkey out of the way and put me in there behind it.
They hammered it into us. You cannot tell anybody about what you saw or what you went through, including your family.
This is Cold War, and that's when I was assigned. Cold War was at its height. The mission at Edgewood was to find a drug that would produce incapacitation to decrease the enemy's ability to perform without killing them.
Where are you, David? You know where you are? Can you say anything, David?
Petra didn't believe anyone got hurt. He went to a deathbed saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That it was a lie.
I have hallucinations almost every night. And it's gone on since Edgewood.
The excerpts you have seen were intended to demonstrate...
I've got regrets about a number of things I've done that would not apply to the work I did at Edgewood. I thought I did a pretty good job with that.
Participants received the incapacitating agent by inhalation. A low dose of agent was fed into the mixing bowl.
This is a story of one of the darkest and most bizarre chapters of recent history.
Borderline hallucinations will come late in the experiment.
One that the U.S. government and military would rather not be told. For 2 decades, secret human experiments were performed on our own soldiers, with the goal to weaponize mind-altering drugs. But what's most shocking is that the soldiers involved in these experiments believe the military is covering up what really happened at Edgewood Arsenal.
The whole thing is just so criminal that they did to their own soldiers, that somebody needs to be held accountable.
As an investigative journalist and a former White House correspondent, I have seen corruption and cover-ups at the highest levels. And I've always tried to bring accountability to our government through my reporting. To see just how deep the rabbit hole goes, I've assembled a team, including fellow investigative journalists Jasper Craven and Lorraine Boissonneau. government archival researchers Kai Baylor and Rick Ramirez, and chemical warfare historian Reed Kirby. Our investigation will take a 360-degree approach. We'll trace the 20-year timeline of the Edgewood experiments through once highly classified documents and films,
Experiencing hallucinations.
and take a deep dive into the human trials of these potent chemical agents through the first-hand accounts from the test subjects themselves.
No one, and I mean no one, have I ever talked to about this.
But the key that may unlock Edgewood's most closely guarded secrets comes from the mastermind of the program itself, Dr. James Ketchum. Through an exclusive, never-before-seen interview recorded just before his death, we'll piece together what really happened at Edgewood and pressure test the soldiers' claim that it wasn't just the Army who was experimenting on them, that darker forces were at play, which the government has been covering up for decades.
At least 8 Nazi scientists were at Edgewood. These were Hitler's favorite chemists in Nazi Germany.
And the CIA was involved. They were actually used to experiment on us, trying to brainwash people, which the CIA was interested in. But all the records were destroyed, and who knows whether they're still doing it or not.
You don't condone that, do you? Destruction of records?
Yes.
Not generally.
You may have heard of Edgewood, but you've never heard the story like this. Edgewood Arsenal has been America's research center for chemical warfare for over a century. Here, scientists developed, manufactured, and tested some of the most lethal chemical agents the world has ever known. But after World War II, Edgewood Arsenal began research into new types of non-lethal agents.
Around 1951, the Army Chemical Center at Edgewood had a crash program to develop an incapacitating psychochemical that would have temporary paralysis without killing an enemy soldier. But at the same time, there was a revolution in pharmacology for treating psychiatric disorders. Because of that, the Army Chemical Center got involved in seeing if the ill effects of those drugs, the side effects that make pharmaceuticals unsuitable, might make them useful as a weapon.
In the search for incapacitating agents, the chemical warfare laboratories are investigating a great many chemical compounds.
There's something in here. They're looking at a survey of different compounds, so things that produce anxiety, hallucinations, and psychoses.
Correct. So they tested as many different chemicals as they could with animals to see which ones were most effective and promising candidates.
In laboratory experiments, a normal cat displays the typical hunter instinct toward a mouse. A minute quantity of lysergic acid diethylamide is administered in aerosol form.
Over 250 different drugs and chemical compounds were tested at Edgewood. But the hallucinogenic effects of lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, showed the greatest potential in the search for an ideal incapacitating agent.
The effects of the psychochemical become apparent. The cat is no longer interested in catching the mouse, and in fact appears to be afraid of it.
So I'm guessing that having to test on humans is partly because you need to know what the experience is like in a human brain, and that's not really something an animal can convey.
Absolutely. Like, animal testing would be the lead up to that point. And then when you have something you think is a solid candidate, then you'd want to do human testing to confirm that it would be a usable weapon.
I was a young, naive soldier, straight out of the tobacco fields in North Carolina. I saw flyers about going on this temporary duty project.
It was for medical research volunteers. They had a program at our theater on the base, and I wanted to see what it was about.
The guy got up and gave us a talk, said, you're going to be testing Army equipment. You know, at the other volunteer bases, testing gas masks, boots, or clothing.
And a whole bunch of good stuff on it about, you know, no KP, no guard duty, and every weekend off. And I said, oh, boy, that sounds really good. I said, I'll volunteer for that.
I was selected. I got a letter to report to Edgewood, Maryland. When I got there, it didn't have the appearance of a military base whatsoever. I really felt good about it. I said, well, this is going to be nice. I'll be here 2 months. And I don't have nothing to do, just go to do some testing of equipment. That was initially what we were told.
We got there, they said there's been a slight program change.
On behalf of the commanding officer and his staff,
We're going to have a group of you.
there's no need to be alarmed at the presence of these cameras.
Not test weapons. We're going to test other non-lethal combatant materials. So we said, fine, we're here, we might as well do it.
And they took a picture of our group. 55 of us were there for 60 days.
Okay, thanks for watching that video. It's something that it's probably worth your time if you're interested in the subject, because there's not a lot that's about Edgewood Arsenal. Most of it's about MKUltra, and so I mean it's a whole nother level, because they're testing things that would basically drive you crazy for days on end, and so these soldiers, they're trying to get to the bottom of this and file a lawsuit. This is one that that there has been a little bit more media coverage of. iHeartRadio did a podcast on Operation Midnight Climax. If you look online, you can see there have been some things written about it. What you've got there is a picture of two pictures of George Hunter White, who was part of the Federal Narcotics Bureau and was really good at being undercover and busting drug dealers. And basically what happened was he became part of this MKUltra program, and they gave him a pretty long leash. And so Midnight Climax is one of them, I don't know, more salacious, but the basis of the program is they set up a brothel in San Francisco and New York, and basically what you would have these Johns coming in, and the agents would be watching them from behind a two-way mirror, and after they did what they did, the drink would be spiked with LSD and other drugs. And so Midnight Climax is a really interesting part of San Francisco history. The fact that you've got this going on within the city, and yeah, like I said, there definitely is some more media coverage of it, because it involves sex. But just imagine that. I mean, you're being watched behind a two-way mirror, you don't even know it, and you've been drugged. And they was so successful, they opened up a second safe house across the Golden Gate Bridge, and then they were just kind of run amok and do all kinds of other testing that was not involving drugs, that the CIA wanted to test stink bombs, and so they would do sort of things like that where they were out of sight of the city, the mainstream audience. I have another 2-minute clip here describing some of the Operation Midnight Climax here. I'll play it for you.
Jolly West was a creepy-ass doctor who specialized in mind control. After performing a lot of these experiments on combatants during the Korean War, he shows up right on these very streets of Haight and Ashbury. West would watch experiments through a one-way mirror and take notes. After the climax, the sex workers would dose them with LSD and perform mind-altering experiments that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. And guess who his favorite patient of all time was? That's right, Charlie fucking Manson. Manson, although on federal probation, committed multiple criminal acts that would send any parolee back to prison in a second. But for some reason, he had a great little get-out-of-jail-free card. How convenient for him. Was it because he was parading a flock of teenage girls here for Dr. West's experiments? Was the gruesome murder of Sharon Tate and her friends one of the results of Project MKUltra? But let's face it, Charles Manson was already quite the son of a bitch. He spent half of his life in jail before the Tate murder. Charlie went from common thief to carjacker, and once even raped a little boy at knife point. We cannot prove that LSD made him any worse of a person, but perhaps he was conscious of the attempted brainwashing and learned how to influence people from the MKUltra project. In Tom O'Neill's amazing book, you will find out that Manson pretty much had a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah, so that's what comes out of this 20-year project called Chaos. You guys really need to check this book out because it really has to do with the California side, with LA, with San Francisco, and Midnight Climax, and how Manson sort of plays into all these things. And so it's alleged that he kind of gets involved with the Midnight Climax operation, and Manson all of a sudden has tons of acid, and it's like, where did you get that? And so it's alleged that he had this he was getting out of jail like too easily, and so it's alleged in the book that you know, he like the YouTuber said, he had a get out of jail free card, and because of the trading of like the drugs and the people. So anyways, 20-year investigative piece. You should definitely check out that book.
Jolly West.
And then, kind of wrapping it up a little bit, we've got, like I mentioned before, Whitey Bulger. And this is one of the things that came out in Stephen Kinzer's Poisoner in Chief. Whitey Bulger was a big-time crime boss in the Boston, New York area, and Johnny Depp played in Black Mask. He played Whitey Bulger's character. But one of the things that came out was they got a hold of his diary, and it was published in, or pieces of it were published in Poisoner in Chief. And basically he was at a penitentiary in the Atlanta area, and they would be giving him so-called vitamins. Like that's what he was smart enough to know that like don't make a big reaction out of this, to like not to let them know that you know that what's going on. So he just was experimented on in prison. And so that's another part of the MKUltra program that is a little bit lesser known because they're prisoners. The stuff with the hospitals and the universities, well, there's paperwork and there's people, but you're talking about prisoners here, and so it's a harder to track down. And I just thought that was a really interesting revelation, just given how big of a character he was. He wrote in his diary, total loss of appetite, hallucinating, the room would change shape, hours of paranoia and feeling violent. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares, and even blood coming out of the walls, guys turning into skeletons in front of me. And there's some crazy stories about the prison experiments, like that people were just continuously dosed for like weeks and like a month, or like 6 weeks, continuously dosed. And so I think that's probably one of the more nefarious parts of that program was the prison experiments. And I want to wrap it up with one more short video where it's Stephen Kinzer talking to a YouTuber about the Whitey Bulger revelations that came out in Poisoner in Chief.
I wanted to read an excerpt from the book, which comes from Whitey Bulger's journal entry about the experiments that were being performed on him in prison. And Whitey Bulger, for those of you listening, he is a Boston gangster. He had the movie Black Mass made about him, where Johnny Depp played Whitey Bulger. And so this is an entry from Whitey Bulger's diary, who's one of the experimentees, one of the expendables. And he wrote, the men in suits would be in a room and hook me up to machines, asking questions like, did you ever kill anyone? Would you kill someone? 2 men went psychotic. They all had the symptoms of schizophrenia. They had to be pried loose from under the beds, growling, barking, and frothing at the mouth. They put them in a strip cell down the hall. I never saw or heard of them again. They told us they were helping find a cure for schizophrenia. When it was all over, everyone would feel suicidal and depressed, wrung out emotionally. Time would stand still, and I tried to quit. But Dr. Pfeiffer would appeal to me, saying, please, you're my best subject, and we are close to finding a cure. And Dr. Pfeiffer was one of the people that Gottlieb was in contact with, who was helping to run the experiments. And I thought 2 things when I read that. I thought, how horrific it must have been to having been dosed like that. And Whitey Bulger, the last part of the quote was, I was in prison for committing a crime and feel like they have committed a worse crime on me. So I was thinking, how bad must it have been to be part of this experiment, that a guy like Whitey Bulger, who has orchestrated the murders of dozens, possibly hundreds of people, who've been involved deep in the mafia, has done a lot of terrible things himself. He's no scrub next to Sidney Gottlieb, but he was like, damn, like this is horrible. Like this to him, this was something that it sounds like he had a hard time understanding how terrible of a crime this would be. And then the other thing that popped into my head was, how responsible is Sidney Gottlieb for the actions of his experimentees after they get out of the experiment, after these prisoners leave and they go back into society? If the ones that don't kill themselves are actually able to function like Whitey Bulger clearly was, how responsible would Sidney Gottlieb be for the aftermath of what he did to these prisoners, which is the action of the prisoners and the actions of the other experimentees that didn't necessarily know what was being done to them, but maybe they went on to commit other heinous acts like killing people or just being terrible people in general. How he's responsible for the medical experiments, but then also it's like, is he also responsible for what Whitey Bulger did after he left prison? Is he responsible for the acts that people did after he basically destroyed their minds? And that was something that I was trying to grapple with too. It's like, it's accountability inception, where he did this medical torture, and then for those people that were able to function after that, they're not walking through the world with a clear lens. They're walking through the world with someone who just blasted their mind away with LSD.
Whitey Bulger had never killed anybody by the time those experiments were carried out on him. He did go on to kill a lot of people, but he was just in jail as a truck hijacker. He was a sort of middle-level Boston thug all the time to happen. And it wasn't until the 1970s, so 20 years later, after Bulger had this terrible experience in prison, that he saw news about MKUltra, the first reports of it in the press, and he immediately figured out this must have been what happened to me. He was right. He didn't know it at the time, but Dr. Pfeiffer, who we mentioned, was a subcontractor, and in that torture that Whitey Bulger underwent was part of an MKUltra experiment. And he told his friends after figuring this out, I'm going to go down to Atlanta, I'm going to find that Pfeiffer, and I'm going to kill him. Now, he never did that, as far as we know. But it does make you wonder, what about all the others? One of the reasons I put the Whitey Bulger story in my book is that there are so few accounts by people who actually know that this is what happened to them, that it can be verified. Like those 7 guys in the Lexington, Kentucky prison, they never wrote anything. They're not accessible to anybody. We wouldn't be able to find them. And the other people in the prison are all documented on protocols that were destroyed when Gottlieb left.
Yeah, and so that's kind of wrapping it up here. There's a lot of different layers to this story, and it's multifaceted. There's a lot of intrigue, rumors, innuendo. Some say, that the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, was in the university MKUltra program. It goes into the JFK assassination with Jack Ruby being dosed in prison and then going crazy. So there's a lot of we just scratched the surface tonight, and so I hope it gives you somewhere to look if you're more interested, and I hope you learned something that you didn't know. And yeah, thank you very much. And so yeah, I think we have the space for a couple more 10, 15 more minutes. But yeah, thank you very much, you guys.